If you pay taxes, chances are you help fund public parks. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, it seems simple on the surface.
But the question we're really digging into today is pretty fundamental, actually. Why should the state, funded by everyone, spend money on things like parks or museums or art?
Especially when they aren't strictly needed for survival.
Right, and not everyone even uses them, and maybe the private market could offer something similar anyway.
It's the central puzzle for certain kinds of public goods. Not defense, not roads, but these other things. And our source material today really focuses on, well, an uncomfortable idea that the usual justifications for funding these discretionary collective goods, they kind of fall apart under scrutiny.
Especially those rooted in traditional liberal theory, they just don't give a solid, principled reason.
Exactly. No strong rationale.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory problem. You see this tension playing out constantly, sometimes in really big ways. Remember that whole fight over Liberty State Park in New Jersey?
Oh, yeah. That case is a perfect example. It really shows this ongoing battle between, public access and the push towards privatization.
For anyone listening who missed it, the really controversial part was a plan to lease a huge piece of the shoreline to a developer.
Who wanted to build this massive, 500-slip private marina.
A wall of mega yachts. It would have literally blocked the public's view of the Statue of Liberty. Can you imagine?
It took a huge public outcry, massive mobilization to actually defeat that plan.
People really fought for that space. It suggests they see something deeper there than just, a patch of grass for picnics.
That gut reaction, that fight,
yeah.
It's just maybe the park isn't just a preference or some minor recreational thing. Maybe it is a fundamental public good.
And the framework we're going to unpack today actually offers that kind of justification. It's called Solidarism.
Right. And it argues that public parks are actually a form of social justice. They act as compensation for the burdens of modern life.
Okay, a completely different angle. So let's start by setting up the problem. Why does classic liberal philosophy have such a hard time justifying funding for these non-universal public goods? What's the roadblock?
Well, it really boils down to this core idea of state neutrality. The liberal democratic state, fundamentally, is supposed to stay neutral about different ideas of what makes a good life.
Meaning?
Meaning, if I love reading philosophy quietly at home and say you love going to a publicly funded jazz concert, the state isn't really supposed to use mandatory taxes to favor your preference over mine. In theory, anyway.
Okay, I get that. So why should tax money subsidize these collective things, science, cultural centers, parks, that not everyone values or uses in the same way? Even John Rawls, the giant of modern liberalism, seemed a bit unsure here.
He did. He was really cautious about using public funds to push what he called perfectionist values.
Perfectionist values, like high culture or specific tastes.
Exactly. He worried it was coercive. He argued that, ideally, any support for these non-essential public goods should really be unanimous.
But he did sort of concede that parks and museums might be okay because they foster political values.
Right. But then he never really explained how a park actually fosters political values. It's just left hanging there.
That ambiguity leaves a pretty big gap, doesn't it, in the theory behind funding discretionary stuff?
It absolutely does. It forces us to ask, okay, if the city funds a big jazz festival, but maybe not a series of sitar concerts, is that just, what the majority wanted? Or is there some principle behind using everyone's tax money this way?
So the philosophy is a bit muddled. Rawls left us hanging. How have policymakers actually tried to justify parks traditionally? Let's run through the usual arguments.
Yeah.
Let's check the three big ones and see why they don't quite cut it for parks.
All right. The first one, and probably the most familiar if you've taken an economics class, is the market failures approach.
Ah, yes, the textbook standard. The state only steps in when the market fails, usually because a good is non-excludable.
Right, meaning it's impossible to stop people who don't pay from using it.
Or non-rivalrous, meaning my using it doesn't stop you from using it, like clean air or national defense. Those are the classic examples.
But parks fail this test pretty quickly. They're definitely excludable.
How so?
Well, just look at Gramercy Park in Manhattan. It's a beautiful little park, but it's fenced off. Only residents who live right there and pay a hefty annual fee get a key.
So you can exclude people from green space?
Absolutely. It proves recreational space is excludable. And beyond that, think about all the private recreational spaces out there.
Golf courses, amusement parks, gyms.
Exactly. The market clearly can provide recreational spaces. So the argument that the state has to step in because the market simply won't provide them It just doesn't hold water for parks.
Okay, so market failure doesn't work. What's the second traditional justification?
That's the basic needs approach, or sometimes called the normative approach.
This one sounds like it's about essentials.
It is. The idea here is that state provision is justified only if the good supplies a primary need, something necessary for a decent life, like food, shelter, basic healthcare, security, maybe education.
And parks, nice as they are.
They don't quite make that cut. I mean, they're hugely important for quality of life, no doubt.
Yeah.
But are they a basic need in that really strict life or death sense? Probably not.
You can technically live a minimally decent life without having a park down the street. They feel more discretionary under this lens.
They do. Which brings us to the third common attempt, the democratic approach.
This sounds more practical, like public goods are just whatever the majority decides they want.
Pretty much. It's the argument that if the majority, acting through their elected representatives, choose to provide something like parks, then that's what we get.
Okay, if the people vote for it, isn't that enough? What's wrong with that?
Well, the source material argues it provides legitimacy. Sure, a policy that's adopted democratically is legitimate. People should follow it. But it doesn't provide justification.
Legitimacy versus justification. What's the difference there?
Justification would mean having a principled reason why this is the right thing to do beyond just people voted for it. The democratic approach doesn't give us any standard to judge the choice itself.
Yeah.
It offers no tools to criticize privatization if the majority suddenly decides to sell off parks.
And it doesn't explain why the state should maybe fund a sculpture garden instead of, say, pouring money into a massive new football stadium for a privately owned team, right?
Exactly. It just becomes managing preferences, whatever the majority happens to want at the moment. There's no deeper principle involved.
Okay, so we've got three big frameworks: market failures, basic needs, democratic choice, and none of them give us a really solid, principled reason why public parks should be public and state funded.
Which really sets the stage for needing a different way to think about it.
Right. So let's dive into the Solidarism. You said it has roots in late 19th century French thought. Durkheim.
Yes, French Republican thought. What's really interesting is its core premise. It starts from a different place entirely. It's fundamentally about compensation, based on the reality of interdependence. Solidarism looks at modern life, cities, industry, how specialized our jobs are, and says, look, this creates huge levels of interdependence. We all rely on each other in complex ways.
Okay.
And this interdependence generates massive benefits, but also massive burdens. And crucially, those benefits and burdens are not shared fairly.
I think I see where this is going. It's a critique of how value itself is created and who gets it.
Precisely. It directly challenges the classic liberal view of private property. Solidarism talks about the unearned increment.
Unearned increment.
Yeah. Think about the value of land in a city. Is it valuable just because the owner built something on it? Or is its value created socially?
By things like nearby subway stops, roads, schools, the fact that lots of people live and work nearby.
Exactly. All that infrastructure, the density, the municipal development, that creates the value. That's the unearned increment. But under the standard system, who captures that value?
The private landowner.
Right. It's socially produced value, but it's privately appropriated.
Okay, that's a powerful critique. But how does a park fit in? How does a park compensate for, say, pollution or this private capture of social value?
So solidarism argues that public goods like parks are a necessary way the public compensates itself or corrects for two main things. First, the negative side effects of urbanization, think traffic, pollution, crowded or unhealthy housing, feeling cut off from nature.
Okay, the downsides of density.
Right. And second, it compensates for that unjust private capture of the socially created value, the unearned increment. So public parks, specifically, are framed as a way to give back to the public some of that access to nature and open space that's lost in dense urban development, which, remember, disproportionately benefits private landowners and developers.
Wow. Okay, so the whole justification shifts. It's not about efficiency, like market failure, or charity, like basic needs. It's about restorative action. Parks aren't just a nice perk. They're a way to correct an imbalance, a compensation for the burdens the system itself creates.
That's the core philosophical move, yes. Now, some critics, maybe like left libertarians, might say, okay, fine, compensate people, but do it with cash. Give everyone a basic income or vouchers they can use to buy access to whatever private park they want.
Right. Why does the compensation have to be a shared physical park?
Solidarism offers three key reasons why the compensation really needs to take the form of shared infrastructure. in actual physical space.
Okay, let's take them one by one. What's the first reason?
The first is solidarity.
How does a physical park create solidarity in a way that just giving people money wouldn't?
Well, the argument is that parks allow for the lived experience of solidarity, even just minimal co-presence, sharing the same space, breathing the same air, under the same public ownership or trust. You don't have to interact directly.
It's like a background sense of shared community.
Exactly. The source calls it a somatic version of imagined community. It's this indirect connection that pushes back against the isolating competitive nature of purely private life.
And if parks rely on private funding, that immediately messes with this idea of civic equality, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
Take the New York City Parks Conservancy system. You've got Central Park, which gets huge amounts of private philanthropic funding.
Right.
Because of that, it has resources like one gardener for every 6 acres. Compare that to the rest of the city's park system, often in less wealthy areas, which averages one gardener for every 133 acres.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. And that private funding model creates these stark inequalities. It allows wealthier people, whose local park is beautifully maintained, to become kind of indifferent to the state of parks elsewhere. It completely undermines that idea of a shared civic space, a shared public estate.
That makes sense, although it's worth remembering, as the source material points out, that the history of creating public spaces isn't always clean.
A really important point.
Iconic places, like many U.S. national parks or Stanley Park in Vancouver, were often created by forcibly removing indigenous communities who lived there.
Yes, that historical context is crucial. The definition of the public and the public good has often been decided by those in power, and it frequently excluded or harmed marginalized groups. We have to acknowledge that complexity.
Definitely. Okay, historical context noted. What's the second reason solidarism gives for shared physical infrastructure?
The second reason is decommodification.
Decommodification. Taking things out of the market.
Exactly. Removing market logic and calculation from certain spheres of life. Parks offer a brief reprieve, the source says, from that world of constant calculation and competition.
Which is seen as harmful in itself.
Yes, because it constantly pits people against each other. When a space like a park is publicly owned, it establishes something different, a public trust. A trust for all citizens, including, importantly, those who aren't even born yet.
That future generations aspect feels really relevant for land use in cities.
It's critical. The built environment is pretty permanent. Once you pave over open space for, say, high-density private condos, it's incredibly hard, almost impossible, to ever get that open space back.
So public ownership becomes a way to protect that possibility for the future, a responsibility.
A fiduciary duty, almost.
Mm-hmm.
And the source uses a great little hypothetical to show how even small bits of commodification can chip away at social connections.
Oh, yeah. What's the hypothetical?
They call it the gentrification city park scenario. Imagine a park puts in user fees for the basketball court. Maybe it's not a huge fee, right?
Yeah.
And maybe losing access isn't extremely harmful in a strict health sense.
Okay.
But what if 2 friends from a less affluent background used to play pickup games there all the time with their wealthier friend, but now they can't really afford the fee regularly?
I see. The fee, even if small, changes the social dynamic.
Right. That act of commodification, of charging admission, has suddenly reduced the opportunity for social connection across class lines. It subtly restructures who gets to interact where. The price tag becomes this invisible fence.
That's a really clear illustration. Okay, so we have solidarity and decommodification. What's the third reason for shared infrastructure?
The third reason is more pragmatic. You could say it's political. With a capital P.
Meaning?
It's about political sustainability and fairness. Universal benefits, things that potentially everyone might use, like parks, schools, libraries, tend to get much broader and more stable political support than means-tested programs.
Means-tested programs being those targeted only at low-income people.
Exactly. Voters are generally more willing to fund things they can imagine themselves or their families using. This broad support makes universal programs more resilient over time.
Okay, that makes practical sense. But how is it compensatory?
Well, investment in this kind of universal public infrastructure acts as a form of de facto compensation. It's available to everyone, so it's universal, but it's not regressive.
Not regressive, meaning it doesn't disproportionately benefit the wealthy.
Correct. In fact, it often works out to be progressive in practice. Less affluent residents often rely on and use public goods like parks, libraries, or public transit more intensely because they have fewer private alternatives.
Right. They might not have a big backyard or private gym membership or a car.
Precisely. So they benefit more, In a relative sense, from high-quality public amenities. The universal provision effectively compensates them more, reflecting their greater need, even though everyone technically has access. It's a universal mechanism with a progressive impact.
Okay, so wrapping this all together,
Mm.
what does this solidarist framework really give us?
Well, it successfully provides what the other frameworks lacked. A principled reason, compensatory justice for the state to provide goods like parks, even if they don't meet those strict market failure or basic necessity tests.
It elevates the discussion. Parks aren't just nice-to-haves or things we fund because of majority preference. They're part of achieving social fairness.
Exactly. It gives a strong philosophical basis to push back against the constant pressure to privatize everything. It forces us to see public infrastructure as potentially correcting social imbalances, both historical and ongoing.
And the logic here. Compensating for negative externalities, building civic ties through shared space. It seems like it could apply to a lot more than just parks.
Absolutely. The source material explicitly suggests this line of reasoning strongly justifies other things like, say, public libraries, ensuring universal broadband access, maybe even certain kinds of public or social housing.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive.
Yeah, think about your own city or town. Look at its budget, its priorities. Which public services seem to be treated as essential acts of social compensation, reflecting this idea of shared burdens and benefits? And which are still treated as, just discretionary extras, the first things on the chopping block when budgets get tight.
If the value of urban life, the vibrancy of our communities, is really produced socially by all of us together, what other collective goods should we maybe start thinking about, not as amenities, but as mandatory compensation for the challenges and inequalities of living together in this highly interdependent modern world?